The auction block stands empty in the fading light of a Louisiana afternoon. The wood is worn smooth by countless feet, darkened by sweat and blood and rain. The year is 1851. Behind the block, the bayou stretches into shadow, cypress trees rising like skeletal fingers from water the color of rust. In the ledger of the New Orleans slave market, there is an entry dated March 14th, written in careful script. One female child, approximately 8 years of age, light complexion, no visible marks or defects, sold to Mr. Horace Blackwell of Rapids Parish for the sum of $400. Below that in different ink, another entry dated June 9th. Same female child, age given as 8 years, light complexion, sold to Mr. Edmund Garrett of Natchitoches Parish for the sum of $375. The discrepancy was noted at the time, questioned briefly, then dismissed. Children looked alike. Records were sometimes confused, but then came the letters. Letters from plantation owners reporting that the girl had been seen in 3 different parishes simultaneously. Letters from overseers claiming the child could not be contained, that she walked through locked doors, that she appeared in fields where she had not been sent. And finally, a letter from a priest in Baton Rouge, dated December 1851, stating that he had buried the girl twice, in 2 different graveyards, 50 miles apart on the same day. This is not a story about slavery, though slavery runs through it like a poison. This is a story about something that wore the shape of a child, that was bought and sold like property but could not be owned, could not be held, could not die. Welcome to this channel. Today, we step into a case that is not just difficult to understand, it reshapes the meaning of fear itself. Like the video, subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The girl's name, as recorded in the auction ledgers, was simply Celine. No surname, no place of birth, no record of parentage. She appeared at the New Orleans slave market in early March of 1851, brought there by a trader named Silas Ketch, a man known for acquiring children from plantations across Louisiana and Mississippi. When questioned about the girl's origins, Ketch claimed to have purchased her from an estate sale in Natchez, but no corresponding records exist. The auction house manager, a meticulous man named Theodore Prout, noted in his personal diary that something about the child disturbed him. He wrote on March 13th, "The girl Celine stands apart from the others. She does not cry. She does not speak unless spoken to. Her eyes are the palest gray I have ever seen, almost silver, and they do not seem to focus on anything in particular." When I approached her to conduct the customary inspection, she looked at me with such stillness that I found myself unable to continue. It was not defiance. It was something else. An absence, perhaps, as though she were looking through me rather than at me. I recommended she be sold quickly. There is something about her that I cannot name, but it unsettles me greatly. Horace Blackwell purchased Celine on March 14th, 1851. With the intention of adding her to the household staff at his plantation, Willowbrook, located along the Red River in Rapids Parish. Blackwell was a cotton planter, a widower in his 50s with 2 adult sons, and a reputation for harsh but efficient management. He kept detailed records of his property, both land and human, and these records survive today in the Louisiana State Archives. According to his ledgers, Celine arrived at Willowbrook on March 20th. She was assigned to work in the main house under the supervision of the head housekeeper, a woman named Maria, who had been enslaved on the plantation for 30 years. Maria's testimony, given years later to a visiting abolitionist journalist, provides our first detailed description of Celine's behavior. Maria said the girl was unlike any child she had ever known. She followed instructions perfectly but showed no emotion, no curiosity, no fear. She never asked questions. She never complained. And she never slept. Maria said she would check on the girl at night and find her sitting upright in the corner of the servants' quarters, eyes open, staring at nothing. Within 2 weeks of Celine's arrival at Willowbrook, strange events began to occur. Objects in the main house would be found moved from their usual places, furniture rearranged, doors left open that had been locked. The overseer, a man named Jacob Thorne, reported seeing the girl in the fields at dawn, standing among the cotton plants, though she had been assigned to indoor duties and should have been in the house. When he approached her, she would vanish, not running away but simply ceasing to be visible, as though she had stepped behind a curtain that only she could see. Blackwell, initially dismissive of these reports, began to pay attention when his own sons corroborated the strange occurrences. The elder son, William, wrote in a letter to a friend dated April 7th, "Father has acquired a peculiar child who seems to defy the normal laws of nature. She appears in rooms she could not have entered. She knows things she should not know. Yesterday, she told Father that the cotton crop would fail due to worms, and today we discovered the infestation she described. Father is disturbed but will not admit it. He speaks of selling her, but I wonder if anyone would buy such a creature." On April 15th, 1851, Horace Blackwell made the decision to sell Celine. He contacted the auction house in New Orleans, but Theodore Prout refused to take her back, citing concerns about her effect on the other merchandise. Blackwell then arranged a private sale to a neighboring planter named Edmund Garrett, who owned a smaller plantation in Natchitoches Parish called Shadowmere. Garrett paid $375, a discount reflecting Blackwell's eagerness to be rid of the girl. The sale was completed on April 22nd, and Celine was transported to Shadowmere the following day. But here is where the records become impossible to reconcile. According to Garrett's plantation ledger, Celine arrived at Shadowmere on April 24th. According to a letter written by Horace Blackwell to his son on the same date, Celine was still at Willowbrook, having refused to leave, standing at the gate for hours, unmoving, until the transport wagon simply departed without her. And according to the journal of a traveling Methodist minister named Reverend Thomas Ainsley, who was visiting plantations along the Red River that week, he encountered a girl matching Celine's description on the road between the two properties, walking alone at night, moving in the opposite direction of anyone traveling from Willowbrook to Shadowmere. If you're still listening, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Edmund Garrett's experience with Celine was even more disturbing than Blackwell's. Garrett was a religious man, a deacon at the local Baptist church, and he initially viewed the acquisition of Celine as an act of Christian charity, rescuing a child from what he perceived as Blackwell's cruel management. But within days of her arrival, Garrett's household descended into chaos. His wife, Margaret, reported that Celine would appear in their bedroom at night, standing at the foot of the bed, motionless and silent. When confronted, the girl would not respond, would not move, until forcibly removed by one of the house servants. The Garrett's daughter, Emily, a girl of 12, became terrified of Celine, claiming that the slave child followed her everywhere, appearing in mirrors and windows, always watching with those pale silver eyes. In a letter to her aunt dated May 3rd, Emily wrote, "There is something wrong with the girl Father bought. She is not natural. I have seen her in 2 places at once. I have watched her walk through walls. She does not eat. She does not drink. And when I asked her where she came from, she said she came from the water, from the deep places, and that she has always been here, waiting." The situation at Shadowmere deteriorated rapidly. Enslaved workers began to refuse assignments that required them to be near Celine. They claimed she brought bad luck, that she was a haint, a spirit that had taken human form. One older man, known as Uncle Rufus, told Garrett that the girl was one of the drowned ones, a soul that had perished in the bayou and could not rest. He said she should be returned to the water, that only there could she find peace. Garrett, skeptical but increasingly desperate, consulted with Reverend Ainsley, who agreed to visit Shadowmere and assess the situation. Reverend Ainsley arrived on May 12th, 1851, and spent 2 days observing Celine. In his journal, he recorded his findings with growing alarm. He wrote, "The child exhibits behavior that I can only describe as supernatural. She does not respond to Scripture. She does not react to prayer. When I attempted to bless her with holy water, the water turned black in the vessel before I could apply it. I asked her if she knew God, and she said she knew many gods, older than the one I worship. I asked her if she was a demon, and she said she was not, that demons had names and purposes, and she had neither. She said she was a reflection, an echo of something that had happened long ago, and that she would continue to appear until the pattern was complete. On May 20th, 1851, Edmund Garrett made arrangements to return Selene to Horace Blackwell, declaring that the sale had been fraudulent, that the child was defective and should be refunded. But when Garrett's men went to collect Selene from the servants' quarters, they found the room empty. The door had been locked from the outside, the windows barred, but the girl was gone. A search of the plantation revealed nothing. Selene had vanished. Garrett, relieved but confused, considered the matter closed. But 3 days later, on May 23rd, a letter arrived at Shadowmere from Horace Blackwell. The letter stated that Selene had returned to Willowbrook on her own, walking up the drive at dawn, and that Blackwell was demanding the return of the $375 he had been paid, as the girl had never actually left his property. Garrett refused, insisting that Selene had indeed been at Shadowmere and that her departure was not his responsibility. The dispute went unresolved, and both men, independently, made plans to sell the girl to someone far away, someone who would take her beyond the borders of Louisiana. But before either sale could be completed, reports began to arrive from across the region. A plantation owner in Aviel's parish wrote to the New Orleans auction house in early June, inquiring about a light-skinned girl with silver eyes who had appeared on his property, claiming to have been sent by the market. A merchant in Alexandria reported that a child matching Selene's description had been seen in his store, standing silently in the corner for hours before vanishing when approached. A priest in Baton Rouge sent a letter to the bishop describing a girl who attended Mass every morning for a week, sitting alone in the back pew, never speaking, never taking communion, her eyes reflecting the candlelight in a way that made the congregation uneasy. And then came the most disturbing report of all. On June 9, 1851, the same day that the auction ledger records Selene being sold for a second time, 2 plantation owners in different parishes, 50 miles apart, each received a girl matching her description, both claiming to have purchased her from the New Orleans market, both producing bills of sale with identical descriptions and prices. The second sale, documented in the ledger as occurring on June 9th, lists the buyer as a man named Mr. Charles Devereaux of Point Coupee Parish. But Devereaux later testified that he never made such a purchase, that he had been in Baton Rouge on that date, and that his signature on the bill of sale was a forgery. The auction house manager, Theodore Prout, investigated the discrepancy and discovered something that made him physically ill. The handwriting in the ledger entry was his own, but he had no memory of writing it. The date was correct, the price was consistent with market rates, and the description matched Selene perfectly. But Prout insisted under oath that he had not seen the girl since March, that she had never returned to the auction house, and that someone or something had used his hand to create a false record. Prout resigned his position shortly after, moved to Virginia, and never spoke of the incident again. If you're still listening, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The summer of 1851 was marked by increasing reports of Selene's appearances across Louisiana. She was seen in Shreveport, in Lafayette, in New Iberia, always alone, always silent, always exhibiting the same unnerving stillness. Plantation owners who encountered her reported similar experiences: objects moving, doors opening, the feeling of being watched by something that was not entirely present. But the most consistent report involved water. Witnesses repeatedly described finding Selene near water sources, rivers, bayous, cisterns, wells. She would stand at the edge, staring into the depths, sometimes for hours unmoving. One overseer, a man named Patrick Sullivan, reported that he had found the girl standing in the middle of a pond on his property, the water up to her chest, her eyes closed, her lips moving as though she were speaking to something beneath the surface. When he called out to her, She opened her eyes and looked at him with such intensity that he fled, leaving her standing in the water. When he returned with help, she was gone, but the water had turned murky and foul, and fish floated dead on the surface. The explanation that emerged from the enslaved community was both simpler and more terrifying than anything the white population could imagine. Among the African and Creole populations of Louisiana, there existed a belief in water spirits, entities that dwelled in rivers and bayous, that could take human form, that were neither living nor dead but something in between. These spirits, called various names in various traditions, were said to be the souls of those who had drowned, particularly those who had died violently or unjustly. The spirits could not rest, could not move on, and so they lingered in the water, occasionally emerging to walk among the living, seeking something they could never find. The enslaved workers who encountered Celine believed she was such a spirit, that she had drowned at some point in the past, perhaps thrown from a slave ship during the Middle Passage, perhaps killed and disposed of in a bayou, and that her spirit had manifested in the form of a child, forever seeking a way back to the water that had claimed her. This belief was reinforced by an incident that occurred in July of 1851. A group of enslaved workers near the town of Natchitoches reported that they had found a body in the Red River, a girl of about 8 years old, with light skin and silver eyes, drowned and partially decomposed. They buried her in a clearing near the river, marking the grave with a simple wooden cross. But 3 days later, on July 18th, another body was found, 40 miles downstream, a girl of the same age and description in the same state of decomposition. This body was buried in a churchyard in Alexandria. And then on July 20th, Celine was seen alive, walking through the market in New Orleans, silent and pale, her clothes dry, her hair combed, looking exactly as she had when she first appeared at the auction house in March. Multiple witnesses confirmed the sighting, including a constable who attempted to detain her for questioning. But when he reached for her arm, his hand passed through her as though she were made of mist, and she disappeared into the crowd. The phenomenon of Celine's simultaneous appearances, her apparent immunity to physical containment, and the discovery of multiple bodies began to attract attention beyond Louisiana. Newspapers in New York and Philadelphia ran stories about the ghost girl of the bayou, a supernatural slave child who could not be bought, sold, or controlled. Abolitionists seized on the story as a metaphor for the injustice of slavery, arguing that the girl's refusal to remain owned was a spiritual rebellion against the institution itself. Pro-slavery advocates dismissed the stories as exaggerations or hoaxes, attempts to undermine the stability of the slave economy. But the reports continued, consistent and credible, coming from sources across the political spectrum, from plantation owners and overseers, from priests and doctors, from enslaved workers and free people of color. All described the same girl, the same silver eyes, the same unsettling presence. By August of 1851, the Catholic Church became involved. Bishop Antlin Blanc of New Orleans, concerned about the spiritual implications of the reports, dispatched a team of priests to investigate. The team was led by Father Jean-Baptiste Moreau, a Jesuit scholar with experience in cases of possession and exorcism. Father Moreau spent 3 weeks traveling through the affected regions, interviewing witnesses, examining the graves where Celine's bodies had been found, and attempting to locate the girl herself. His report, submitted to the bishop in September, is one of the most detailed contemporary accounts of the phenomenon. Father Moreau concluded that Celine was not a ghost in the traditional sense, not a soul trapped between worlds, but something he called a persistent manifestation, a spiritual imprint left by a traumatic event, repeating itself across time and space. He theorized that the girl had died under circumstances so horrific, so unjust that her essence had fractured, creating multiple copies of herself that existed simultaneously in different locations. He wrote, "This is not possession. This is not haunting in the conventional understanding. This is an echo that has become louder than the original sound. The girl exists because she cannot stop existing. She is sold because she was sold. She drowns because she drowned. And she will continue to manifest until the original sin is acknowledged and atoned for. But what was the original sin? What had happened to the real Selene if such a person had ever existed? Father Morrow attempted to trace the girl's origins, following the trail back through Silas Ketch, the trader who had brought her to New Orleans. Ketch, when located and questioned, was evasive, then hostile, then finally broke down and confessed. He said he had not purchased Selene from an estate sale in Natchez. He had found her in the bayou, floating face down in the water, dead. But when he pulled her out, intending to give her a decent burial, she had opened her eyes, gasped for air, and sat up as though waking from sleep. Terrified but opportunistic, Ketch had wrapped her in a blanket, taken her to New Orleans, and sold her as though she were alive, as though she had not just emerged from death. He said he knew it was wrong, but the money was good, and he convinced himself that the girl was truly alive, that whatever had happened in the bayou had been a near drowning, not an actual death. But he admitted when pressed that he had known the truth. The girl was not alive, she was something else, and by selling her, he had trapped her in a cycle of ownership and escape that she could not break. If you're still listening, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Father Morrow's report recommended that the church perform a ritual of release, a ceremony designed to free Selene's spirit from its cycle of manifestation. The ritual would require locating all the graves where her bodies had been buried, exhuming them, and performing a unified burial with proper rites. But before the plan could be implemented, Selene appeared one final time, in a way that would define the case forever. On the night of September 15, 1851, she appeared simultaneously at 3 different churches in Louisiana: the Cathedral of St. Louis in New Orleans, the Church of the Immaculate Conception in Natchitoches, and St. Joseph's Church in Baton Rouge. At each location, witnesses reported the same scene. The girl entered the church during evening services, walked to the altar, and stood before the crucifix. She raised her hands, palms up, as though in supplication or accusation. And then she spoke, her voice echoing through the sanctuaries with a clarity that made the words unmistakable. She said, "I was thrown from the ship. I was drowned in the river. I was buried in the field. I have died 1,000 times, and each time you forget. You buy and sell what you have killed. You own what you have destroyed, but I remain. I will always remain until you remember." The manifestation ceased after that night. Selene was never seen again, at least not in the concentrated, undeniable way she had appeared throughout 1851. The graves where her bodies had been buried were exhumed, and in each case the coffins were found to be empty, the earth undisturbed from below. No bodies, no remains, no evidence that anyone had ever been buried there. The auction house ledger entry for June 9th was examined by multiple experts, and all agreed that Theodore Prout had written it, though he insisted he had not. The bills of sale were verified as authentic, bearing the signatures and seals of the buyers, though the buyers denied making the purchases. And the reports, the testimonies, the letters, all remained in the archives, unsolved and unexplainable. In the years following 1851, there were occasional sightings of a girl matching Selene's description, always near water, always silent, always alone. A fisherman on Lake Pontchartrain reported seeing her standing on the shore in 1862, during the Civil War, watching the Union ships pass. A farmer in Ascension Parish claimed to have found her in his well in 1875, submerged but alive, her eyes open beneath the water. A photographer in New Orleans developed a plate in 1893 and found her image in the background of a street scene, though no one remembered seeing her when the photograph was taken. Each sighting followed the same pattern: brief, undeniable, and ultimately unverifiable. She would appear, be seen by multiple witnesses, and then vanish, leaving no trace except the testimony of those who had encountered her. The question of who Selene was, or what she represented, has never been satisfactorily answered. Historians have searched for records of a child matching her description who drowned or disappeared in Louisiana between 1845 and 1851, but the documentation of enslaved individuals during that period is sparse and incomplete. Thousands of children passed through the slave markets of New Orleans, many with no recorded names, no documented origins, no accounting of their fates. If Celine existed as a real child, if she was thrown from a ship or drowned in a river or killed, and disposed of in the manner her spirit described, the evidence has been lost to time. What remains is the pattern, the testimony, the persistent sense that something terrible happened, something that created a wound in reality itself, a wound that manifested as a child who could not be owned, could not be held, could not die because she had already died over and over in ways that were never acknowledged, never atoned for, never remembered. Some researchers have suggested that Celine was not a single individual but a collective manifestation, a spiritual amalgamation of all the children who died during the Middle Passage and the internal slave trade, their suffering condensed into a single recurring figure that appeared wherever the violence of slavery was most acute. This theory would explain the simultaneous appearances, the multiple bodies, the inability to trace a single origin. Celine was everyone and no one, a representation of loss so vast that it could only be expressed through the impossible, through the supernatural, through a presence that defied all attempts at containment or explanation. She was the answer to a question that no one wanted to ask. How many children were lost? How many were killed? How many disappeared without a name, without a grave, without anyone to remember them? The Catholic Church never officially endorsed Father Morrow's findings, and his report remained classified in the diocesan archives until it was discovered by researchers in the 1970s. By then, the story of Celine had become legend, a ghost story told in Louisiana, a cautionary tale about the dangers of buying and selling human beings. But for those who study the case, who read the original documents, who trace the pattern of appearances and disappearances, the story is something more than legend. It is evidence of something that cannot be explained by conventional means, something that suggests the past is not truly past, that trauma can echo through time, that some injustices are so profound that they tear holes in the fabric of reality itself, creating phenomena that persist long after the original events have been forgotten. If you're still listening, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? In 1935, a folklorist from Chilean University named Dr. Margaret Thornton conducted an oral history project in rural Louisiana, interviewing elderly residents about their memories and the stories passed down from previous generations. One interview, conducted with a woman named Esther Broussard, age 97, touched on the legend of Celine. Esther said her grandmother had been enslaved in Natchitoches Parish and had known the girl, or at least had encountered her. Esther said her grandmother described Celine as a warning, a sign that some things cannot be bought or sold because they belong to themselves, even in death. She said her grandmother had told her that Celine was still out there, still appearing, still walking the roads and standing in the water, waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. When Dr. Thornton asked what the right question was, Esther said, not who was she, but who threw her in the water, who killed her, who profited from her death. Until someone answers that, she will keep appearing. She will keep reminding us, because we have forgotten too much. And forgetting is a sin that demands payment. The last documented sighting of Celine occurred in 1963. A civil rights worker organizing voter registration in rural Louisiana reported encountering a young girl on a back road near the town of Opelousas. The girl was alone, walking barefoot, wearing a simple gray dress that looked as though it belonged to another century. The worker stopped to offer assistance, but the girl did not respond. She simply stood at the edge of the road, staring at the nearby bayou with eyes that the worker described as pale and reflective, like polished silver. The worker later told colleagues that he had felt an overwhelming sense of sadness in the girl's presence, a grief so deep and ancient that it seemed to emanate from the ground itself. He said he asked the girl if she was lost, if she needed help, if there was someone he could contact. She turned to look at him, and for a moment, he said, he saw not one girl but dozens, hundreds, an endless procession of children standing behind her, all with the same eyes, all silent, all waiting. And then she spoke. She said, "I am not lost. You are." And she walked into the bayou, the water rising to her waist, her chest, her neck, her head, until she disappeared beneath the surface without a ripple. The civil rights worker, a man named James Mitchell, reported the incident to local authorities, but no missing child matching the description was ever found. No body was recovered from the bayou, and when Mitchell returned to the spot days later, he found the water clear and calm, with no sign that anyone had entered it. He wrote about the experience in a letter to his wife, stating that he believed he had encountered something supernatural, something that carried the weight of history, the accumulated sorrow of countless unnamed victims of slavery. He said he did not know if the girl was real or a vision, but he knew that she was important, that her appearance was a message that needed to be heard. He died in 1987, and his letter was discovered among his papers, along with a small sketch he had made of the girl, showing her standing at the water's edge, her eyes fixed on something beyond the viewer's sight. The case of Selline remains open in the sense that no definitive explanation has ever been provided. The physical evidence is fragmentary. Auction records that contradict each other, bills of sale for a child who may never have been alive, testimonies from witnesses who saw impossible things. The spiritual evidence is more substantial but harder to quantify. A pattern of appearances that suggests intentionality, a message that echoes through the testimony of those who encountered her, a presence that persists in the folklore and memory of Louisiana. Scholars continue to debate what Selline represents. Some see her as a historical figure, a real child whose death was so traumatic that it generated supernatural phenomena. Others see her as a symbol, a collective representation of all the children lost to slavery. And some see her as something more, a genuine manifestation of spiritual trauma, proof that certain events are so horrific that they leave permanent scars on the world, scars that take the form of recurring hauntings, of impossible appearances, of presences that will not rest until the truth is acknowledged. The truth, in this case, is elusive. We know that a girl named Selline was recorded as being sold in New Orleans in March of 1851. We know that she appeared in multiple locations simultaneously, that she was associated with water and death, that she spoke of being drowned and forgotten. We know that her appearances followed a pattern, that they occurred during a period of intense violence and displacement in Louisiana, and that they ceased after she delivered her final message in the churches. But we do not know who she was before she died. We do not know who killed her, or why, or how many others died in the same way, unnamed and unremembered. And we do not know if she will appear again, if the pattern will resume, if the message will be repeated until someone finally listens, finally acknowledges, finally remembers. What we are left with is the question, the same question that Esther Broussard's grandmother posed, who threw her in the water, who profited from her death, and why more than a century later does the question still matter? The answer, perhaps, is that history is not a sequence of events that can be neatly catalogued and filed away. History is a living thing, a wound that continues to bleed until it is treated, until the truth is spoken, until the forgotten are remembered. Selline's appearances were not random. They were purposeful, deliberate, designed to force confrontation with an uncomfortable truth. Children died. Children were sold. Children were thrown into the water and forgotten. And one of them at least refused to stay forgotten. She emerged from the water over and over in different places, in different forms, demanding to be seen, demanding to be acknowledged, demanding that someone ask who she was and what had been done to her. The final haunting question, the one that remains unresolved, is this. Is Selline still out there? Is she still walking the road, standing in the bayou, appearing in places where the violence of slavery lingers like a stain? Or has she finally found rest, released from her cycle by the passage of time, by the slow, incomplete work of remembering? The answer, if it exists, lies not in archives or documents, but in the places themselves, in the water and the earth, in the old plantations and the forgotten graves. It lies in the willingness to look, to listen, to acknowledge what was lost. Because Celine's message was clear: I will remain until you remember. And remembering, it seems, is the one thing we have consistently failed to do. Until we succeed, until we truly confront the depth of what happened in those years, in those places, to those children, the pattern may continue. The girl may appear again. And the question will remain, echoing through time like her footsteps on the water, waiting for an answer that has yet to be given.